Those of you, there's a few new faces basically who haven't been here. Many of you have been here. The Fridays of the Court is a monthly series that kind of alternates between technical topics and business topics. This year, basically, I was just letting a few folks know, Ted Tanner, the next talk, has agreed to do a talk on blockchain technology, which has become very, very timely. I guess everybody's wondering about this cryptocurrency and that kind of thing. But the reality is the applications are just enormous. Today we have Ted Beeling with us. I've known Ted probably for 8 of the 10 years he's been in town when we first met. He's a full stack developer who I got to know, I guess, when you were at Spark, and then went to work for Google, and today actually works for GitHub, a product that we use, and we're real pleased to say donate the entire, basically, because of our nonprofit status, we don't pay any fees, so it's kind of nice that they actually support nonprofits and that kind of thing. But I think the whole topic is, and it's more technically oriented folks here today, is how GitHub is using its own infrastructure to build out their next products, and that's the talk. I appreciate Ted taking his time, originally from Hilton Head, so one of the few folks from South Carolina, basically, and has two, I was going to say two twins, and has twins.
Yeah, I do in fact have 2 twins.
So, and he might give a little bit of introduction, we'll get right into the topic. Again, basically, these things are very, for those of you who haven't been, kind of informal, so if there's something that kind of, you feel free to kind of jump, just kind of ask the question, and that kind of thing. So don't, there's no such thing as a stupid question. We're here to learn and that kind of thing. So I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Ernest. I'm excited to be, pardon me. I'm excited to be here, and thank you all for being here. I love these, I love the timing of these talks because unlike an after-work event, it's a very intentional act to be here. Before work, you come into work a little bit later maybe, and so we're all here kind of for a very motivated purpose. So I've spoken here a couple times before on other topics, and so I love this type of thing that we do here. So my name's Ted Beeling, and not long ago I started working at GitHub. Previously I was at Google. Here in town we have a large data center for Google up toward Monk's Corner, and so I was there for about 4 years, and check out my LinkedIn if you want to see everything, but that's essentially the context. So at GitHub, the company is based in San Francisco. So, well, why am I here? There's one other employee on a different team, and I are working remotely from Charleston. So, in fact, the majority of the company does work remotely. So, well, that's sort of unusual. And the awesome thing from a company perspective is that we get to hire people from all over the world, not every country, but a lot of different countries, and really tap into excellent talent no matter where they are. And we'll kind of talk about how the process that we use at GitHub from the perspective of a software engineering company allows us to leverage that. So a few people may not be as familiar with GitHub. Does anybody, for anybody, is my earlier slide your first exposure to the term GitHub? Okay.
Part of it.
Okay. Second question, who in here considers themselves a working software engineer of some type? Most people, not everybody. Okay. For today, my sort of goal is, we're not going to have almost any code, I think, in this deck, but is to kind of speak broadly about our process and how we do things and our motivation, some of our tools, in kind of general terms, So overall, GitHub is essentially it's about source code hosting. So as a developer, you write code, and in whatever language, if it's JavaScript, if it's COBOL, anything, and when you write code, it's a very creative process, right? When you write code with other people, it then becomes a collaborative process. Well, that gets a lot more interesting than just doing code by yourself. When I have a little hobby project, I still put it on GitHub as a private repository, just so it's somewhere, but really the power of the product is in getting people to work together as teams, and in a secure way, in a safe way, etc. There's a lot of project management tools. I'm not going to dive too deep on that, but we can talk about it if you want to. One of the coolest things about the platform is that it tries to focus on what we think of as like the middle 80% of what people need, who are the users. And there's a huge diversity of users from, new developers and hobbyists and small teams at startups, giant megacorps that are household names use the product. And so thinking of all those different types of users, I should say it's not just about code. If you're doing graphic design, if you're doing web design, even for a non-digital medium, if you're doing print, trying to use a word besides design, any kind of art, right? Ma'am? Graphics. Yeah, thank you. That is a great, it's the same process even though it's not code, right? And it can be still collaborative in the same way. The reason I say that is that we target like the middle 80% of what people need, and we keep it very simple. We don't want to add every single feature. So there are APIs that as a developer with some simple scripting, that if you have a specific thing that your team wants to do, and we actually do this on my team a lot, you can write some simple code to then do your thing without GitHub having to add the feature from a product standpoint. So it kind of gives you that level of power for that next level. Pretty big website, 76 million projects, 27 million users, which is more than Texas. I had to look this up. And it is a similar size to North Korea, which I didn't know it was that big. Timely right now, right? Big company. I mean, I come from Google, which is a very, very big company, 65,000 employees. I've worked at a small company. I've worked by myself. So this is in the middle, right? It's, 700 plus employees globally. And it's been around, 11 years, I guess, now. It's actually a fairly recent company. So Git, does anybody do source control with something other than Git for the people that raised your hand as a developer? Okay, a couple folks. So most people use Git. Other people have a familiarity with Git. For those who maybe see this on video, Git is about, it's called a version control system, which is a specific term for taking the body of your text, your images, whatever your files are, any kind of files really, and then as they change over time, which everything does, how do you say, at this point in time, I'm going to put a comment and then kind of snapshot that, say, here it is, and then the way I do it very granularly. 10 lines later, I make some tiny increment of progress. I do another, it's called a commit, right? And I'll have a pull request where it's 1,000 commits. Come on in. So Git itself is open source, and it is, unlike most other version control systems, there's several others, right? I can think of probably 10. It was invented in order to be decentralized. Now, what's interesting about the way people use GitHub, and there's some other tools that work kind of like GitHub in a comparable way, right? It ends up being used in more of a centralized way with that workflow, but Git itself, can work in a very flexible way, kind of however your workflow goes. And so to kind of a lot of people ask, what is GitHub versus Git? Git is this open source product, very sort of self-contained, simple, and then GitHub is a website based around helping people use Git and doing that hosting, collaboration, all this kind of stuff that's around Git. We'll talk more about repositories a little later. It was originally invented for engineering the Linux kernel, which is an incredibly large piece of software that runs on billions of devices. I think everybody's kind of heard of Linux. Does anybody know who that is on the right? Yeah. So does anyone know who the other guy is?
You?
It's me in 2002, much younger. So I was at this conference that was on a cruise ship. It's called a Geek Cruise. And I was explaining this talk to my wife, and she's like, "Are you going to use that picture of you and Linus?" I said, "Yes, I definitely am, because I love it." So anyway, we got to chat for a few minutes, and so interesting character. So today we'll talk about, we kind of touch on it a little bit, but how does GitHub communicate internally? What is our development process? And then how do we automate that process? Automation is throughout our company at every level, and it's really kind of key to how we do things. First, about communication. We center our work around the website, github.com. Does anybody notice anything funny? This is almost a real screenshot about the URL bar. Well, specifically the URL. There's a lot of GitHubs in there. Okay, so what is the deal with that? So GitHub, the organization, uses github.com, the service, to build the project called GitHub. Yeah. And so internally we call this repository GitHub. A little redundant, but kind of makes sense. I don't know what else we would call it unless it was some code name, right? We call this .com, just the website. So this is clearly the center of the product, and we have a bunch of other components that kind of work together with it. It is Ruby on Rails. It was Rails in 2007, and it's still Rails. And probably it's definitely one of the larger Rails apps in existence. I don't know how you would rank this in any specific way. It's very, very large. If you want to use the word monolith, this is probably that, and then times like 10. We are incrementally, as we have an engineering need, right? It's not just blindly peeling off components of it on the back end. A lot of the heavy lifting I/O stuff is being done in Go, which is a pretty great language for that type of work, and it's a different talk. So the point of the way we've built github.com, the service, is that we have a very specific orientation on what is our process. But we're also flexible about the process, right? I should rephrase that. We know what our process is, and we build tools to support that, and also everybody else's process, too, ideally. That's a little more fair. I work on the enterprise team specifically, so a lot of this, kind of my orientation is toward that. When I say enterprise, GitHub Enterprise, if you think of it as taking, you can imagine everything that goes into making a large website of load balancing and server daemons and monitoring and backup strategy and replication, all kind of stuff. And we kind of box that up in order that we can then ship it to customers where, specific customers have needs where they really like the experience of github.com, but for regulatory, security, other reasons, they would need to use it within their security boundary. So, like what I do is I'm a systems engineer for that product. So I add features and make improvements to that, specifically the VM image part of that specific product for our company. So when I'm doing that work as a software engineer, as a systems engineer, the center of what I do is around pull requests. And what is a pull request is probably a different talk. But essentially that gives us an opportunity to say, here are some proposed changes to the code base. Let's talk about them, either on a general level or calling out specific lines of code. As a code reviewer, hi Ted, on line 37 in this file, you kind of took this approach. What do you think about this other consideration? Could it be simpler? Could it be more robust? Blah, blah. We go back and forth. I either do or don't make a change. And it enables that social angle on coding as a team. When you're doing pull requests, we enable you to use Markdown, which is sort of this lightweight text formatting mechanism. So you can do like tables and links and checklists and stuff like that. So it's not just typing, right? I mean, it is typing, but it's not just plain text. We also keep our documentation in the repository. It happens to be a Markdown file. It could be HTML or something else. And having that code, having that documentation alongside the code is key. Versus the other thing where you have like this other website that's like a different piece of software that's like your knowledge base or whatever, and then I've never seen them be in lockstep even at the beginning, honestly. But especially over time, as the code evolves or the docs change, it's easy for them to not be in sync, and that's frustrating to everyone. are we on time? 8:50? Are we 30 minutes or so today, I guess? All right, well, we'll talk for a while. We'll skip some things. Essentially about our process, though, we focus on communicating asynchronously. So I'm in South Carolina. Some of our team is on the West Coast, not necessarily in the company office. Really, half my team is in Europe. So from a time zone standpoint, I think it's 8 hours difference from one side to the next. Like my team is not operational, so we're not trying to like follow the sun. It's not intentional from that side, but it just happens to be where our people are, and they're all awesome, by the way. So working asynchronously, yeah, I'll take you in a second. Communicating asynchronously enables someone in Europe to make a comment on a pull request, on an issue, even in chat, and then we have no expectation that it'll be immediate, right? It might be some hours later, it might be the next day. If you make a comment to California, the sun doesn't go around, but the Earth goes around, right? Galileo, right? I mix up Galileo and Copernicus, but that's a different talk also. It might be the next day for that to get replied. We do some video conferencing. We try to limit that. We do like a typical manager one-on-one regularly, the same as any other one-on-one. When I was at Google, I did a lot of video conferencing anyway, even though most of us are in that office, with California, with other sites, different teams, whatever. At GitHub, we do some pairing. Different people have different styles about that. I just, if I'm hitting a hard design challenge, I just love to, pick a coworker that's kind of been involved with that and be like, hey, can we jump on a video chat for an hour and kind of work through this and kind of move forward, with high ping, right? We do a weekly team meeting, which is explicitly not a status meeting. Status happens on this thing called Radar, where every Monday an issue opens up in our repository for our team, and it says, hi, here's like a summary. It's all automated, scripted, right? And then people on the team put comments about like what they did, what they're planning, free form, right? Yes, sir, you had a question.
Yeah, and in this environment of varying time zones and a development team,
Yeah.
are you doing daily stand-ups or are you using what's the culture of new product development at GitHub?
I love that you teed up that question. We explicitly do not do daily stand-ups. We explicitly do not do Agile. We explicitly do not do Scrum. We do almost no formal process.
Interesting.
At least on my team. Maybe other people at GitHub do different things.
Yeah.
And I have no advocacy one way or the other. Every team figures it out, right? But I've thought about that. I don't really have a specific answer about why in any meaningful way.
But weekly you sync up in this Radar.
Right.
Yeah, I gotcha. Okay.
But that's not face-to-face, that's automated in
Right.
text.
It's just comments on an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I say issue, think of it as a bug tracker. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So has anybody done a YouTube presentation or something on Radar? It would be interesting to me to see it, because I'm the same way you are. We're spread out about 12 hours.
I love the question. If there are more to explain about Radar than I just said, then yes, YouTube video would be awesome.
Yeah.
It is. I said flippantly, and I shouldn't. It's freeform.
Now, really, what I want is the code.
It's probably 20 lines of Ruby, or pick a language. I don't know what language you like, but specifically, I apologize for being a little flippant. From cron or some other scheduler, fire off a little script that has a credential for your GitHub repository that, and you can look up the API online.
It just pulls in
It literally creates an issue. In our case, there's a little summary of other open issues. So it's just a query and it spits out the results as Markdown. What does it do? There's a couple other places where people post news within the company. It'll do a little summary of that with a hyperlink. So then the basic, the initial comment on that issue, it's probably 20 or 30 lines, reading the result, right? So it's whatever makes sense to you, right? The way we do things would have very little overlap with almost any other team because it's kind of specific to what the things that we look at.
But it really does take the place of a stand-up. in your case.
It has for us, yeah,
Yeah.
for my team. Yeah.
Cool.
So is it like a pivotal, is it like pivotal tracker? Is it-
I've not used Pivotal Tracker much. It's like any other bug tracker system. I'm trying to remember how Pivotal Tracker works. I haven't used that recently, but yeah, I talk about opening an issue. If it was like Bugganizer or something, then it would be just like creating a new bug. And you know, I love this question, and I didn't expect this interest. So let me see if there's a way I can follow up with more specifics somehow. Maybe we'll do a blog post. I mean, in fact, I've never written a company blog post for GitHub, so this sounds like a great topic. I love it. Yeah. And yeah, I think, yeah, I love the questions. So I think the takeaway is to leverage, you know, if you don't use GitHub, you're not going to hurt my feelings, right? There's a bunch of other tools that do this kind of thing. I like GitHub, but you know, there's other ways to do it. The point overall is to use automation in order to implement whatever it is that your team has decided is your process, right? And it doesn't have to even agree across your company, right? Like my team uses Radar, a couple other teams use a Radar type of thing. Some teams you have a different way of doing stuff, right? So I'm not trying to say it's like the thing everybody should be doing, right? Yes,
So you said most of your communication with other developers is asynchronous.
Yes, sir.
Do you ever have the need to kind of get everybody's heads together to wrestle with a thorny issue? Do you do that in real time, or do you handle that asynchronously?
That's a great question. So you talked about thorny issues. We do twice a year on my team we call it a team mini summit, and so we pick a city and we all come for a few days, and that focuses more on number one, it's a social thing, right? Because we don't know each other except for getting together and maybe if we have a one-on-one by video. So it really helps sort of cement kind of social bonds, especially thinking about reading what people have written, right? It's easy to take something out of context, For me, I think I'm funny, and some of those people don't agree, and some things happen. But even if I'm not trying to be funny, it's like, why did I say that? And I'm like, oh, man, I totally see that point of view. Yeah, let's talk about that, and then we refine, right? Whereas with that social connection, right, you kind of have the context for who a person is. So that's really important for our team to meet twice a year. Especially for new people, but even for people that have been around a couple years. And we don't really deep dive on specific technical engineering topics of that. It's more road mapping and social connection and some planning, some peer-to-peer presentations, stuff like that. The way we deal with what a person might call a thorny issue is kind of ad hoc. A lot of it would happen in chat, probably. If it was very interactive, especially with the team, right? So far, I've not seen a thing where it's like, hi, I'm going to call a meeting on a Wednesday, and I want these 5 people to be there so that we can hash something out. Like, you can do that, but I haven't seen that happen so far. It more tends to be in chat. It more tends to be with these kind of comment threads, right? And I think the advantage, number one, and I'm kind of talking a lot, but number one, the advantage is I've been in meetings where I'm like, man, I know this person probably has some good thoughts, but they're not being heard, right? Has anybody had that experience? Mm-hmm. Where like, I'm in a meeting, this person's not being heard, especially as we try to improve diversity in our community, right? People who have not historically been heard, it can be hard to find your initial voice. So sometimes. What's cool about working asynchronously is everyone is on a level playing field. You open the thing up and here's a box, it's like, hi, please type your thing, and nobody's either making eye contact or not, or distracted or not, or whatever. You just see a box and you put your thing out there, and it's very much on its merit as far as how it's received. So I think that's cool on that angle, personally. I think it allows people to be more thoughtful, right? Frankly, it allows people to focus on the problem more so than being in a meeting with 12 people and all the social dynamics and kind of structuring that on that level, you can kind of pause, not entirely, but kind of reduce that part of your brain, kind of focus on what is the engineering question happening, or we talk about design stuff too. What is the design question happening here? And be thoughtful and revise. I've had things where, maybe I write a comment in the morning, I go back later, I happen to see it, I'm like, man, I didn't write that in a great way. So I kind of edit it a little bit, smooth it out, where speaking, it's just linear, right? So that's kind of how we approach it.
Thanks.
I kind of got to move on. Is that okay?
Go ahead.
All right, I appreciate it.
I can ask it later.
Yeah, and we'll chat later. I'll stick around to you later. Yeah, appreciate it. I do want to talk a little bit about our development process. So the center of our engineering work uses this process we call GitHub Flow. You can look this up. There's a URL. If you just do a search on your favorite search tool for GitHub Flow, there's a nice little explanation. And we kind of talked about it, but like if I have either a proposed idea or as a team we've agreed we're going to do something, the first thing I'll do as my development process is I will create a new branch. What is a branch is kind of a different talk, but essentially within Git, I'm saying here is the history of all that has happened until now, and then from that point, I'm then going to take my own fork in the road. I'm going to make a new road. How can I say this? I'm going to make a new fork in the road that goes a different direction, whereas somebody else simultaneously might have their own branch that takes their own fork, right? So I have my own then path of history in parallel with other people's own path, right? That's why it's called branch. On that branch, independently of what everybody else is doing, I'm going to make some commits, and we kind of talked about that earlier a little bit. A commit is just a series of changes, adds and removes, all it is. And once I have an initial version of that, I try to open this pull request kind of on the early side, but I will then what's called push my branch. So all that exists in my computer only, right, in my little laptop. So I will then push that branch to the website, at which point no one really knows about it yet unless they go looking for it. But I will then open a pull request, which we talked about, and the pull request says, hi, between the main line, it's a branch called master usually, between that and what Ted has done, this is the set of differences. And we talk about all the social aspects around that. There's also a lot of ways that automation can then hook into the pull request to do things like running continuous integration, showing the results of all the testing, and you can have any kind of scripting that makes sense for your process. It says, oh, there's a new pull request. I'm going to do something interesting with the fact that that happened. We talk about later. We use that as a platform for discussion, for code review. Code review is throughout our company. It's one of our core operating principles. The specifics vary by team. Some are more formal than others. Ours is fairly informal. And then ultimately, the outcome of a pull request is one of three things. One, nothing ever happens. Two, it gets closed. It's like, cool, we tried that. We're not going to do that for whatever reason. Let's just close it. Or it gets merged. So we talked about like making this fork in the road your own kind of journey, and then ultimately you kind of take all those changes and merge them back into the main line, and then it becomes part of the product. So I promised to talk about Hubot. So Hubot is our little robotic buddy that is just a bunch of scripts, and you could, if you want to do something like this, you could either use Hubot, it's open source, or you could do your own thing, totally flexible. And so in our chat system, I can type magic things, right? It starts with a dot. So there's a command called CI, continuous integration. So .ci build GitHub, the name of the project, / branch name. So the idea is I have a branch called tbailing / new button or something. So I can tell the CI server, hi, please go build this branch. And in that case, it does not put anything in the chat room. But if I do a deploy, let's actually fast forward. It looks like this. This is a different, slightly different example. So in the team chat room that everybody can see, which is why it's called chat ops, it is not one-on-one with Hubot. Like this is in a specific chat room that if people are interested in what has happened with this type of thing, they can see and both as far as what I've done and what the outcome was. So I type .deploy, that branch to an environment. This is slightly fictionalized, this is almost real. And then Hubot a minute later says, cool, I see a branch on the server, I am deploying it to the dev environment. This is what, 9 minutes later. It says, cool, Mr. Bailey, this is great, like I built the product and I deployed it to our cloud provider, and here's the IP address that you can look at the result of the build from your specific branch of the product, right? So that's cool. This is huge. This is like the core. This is probably if you don't have some kind of command line automation like this, if it's chat ops or something that makes more sense for you, this is number one, right? Can you do a deploy from a branch of your product in an isolated environment specific to that developer? That's awesome. It is such an accelerator for development. And it works if you're by yourself too. You don't have to be some huge company for this to be valuable. So there's a bunch of other commands that are cool, that are helpful, but I mean, that's sort of, you kind of get the point, right? We have this little sparkle thing where you can like give props to somebody for doing something good, right? So it's fun too, right? We use a lot of emoji, so pretty much every emoji that's available. In fact, we have our own emoji gets used, so that kind of helps with things. That was actually my last slide. I think I talked about everything I wanted to. I have some specifics to talk about, but I don't know how we're doing on time, but I'm happy to take questions. Let's see, we'll start with you. Yes, sir.
What CI tool are you using? Are you using it on-prem or are you using it hosted?
That's a very interesting question. So yes, we are currently migrating from doing CI with bare metal to doing CI on in IaaS infrastructure as a service provider. It's one you've heard of, and so we're actually doing the migration right now. So probably some things will remain on-premise, and some things will move to the cloud. Kind of the best of both worlds out of necessity for the things that we do. Like, I'm not going to advocate one way or the other. You know, there's specific reasons, right? The CI tool that we use is this hybrid that we came up with. We call it Janky. It's open source, Janky, and so it is this combination of. It's actually based on Jenkins, which is a pretty common CI tool, open source. So this is like Jenkins backend with this like chat ops, Hubot, deep integration. So the outcome of that is like on every push, there's hooks, right? So with GitHub, you can do this webhooks thing where it'll fire an event to your tool that says, "Hi, you know, TBLN just pushed this update. Do something with it." And then the Janky server says, "Cool, I'm going to take that branch. I'm going to copy it down. I'm going to run the script that like installs dependencies and does the build and does the testing and whatever." And I'm going to report back to the pull request, which I mean, I wish I got a screenshot of. But like, you'll see his pull request where his comments on the bottom, it's like, for these like 20 different like test suites, here was the results, right? Red or green. And then we have some conditionals where in order to have a green merge button on the pull request, all the CI jobs have to have passed, which is pretty awesome. I think I answered your question. What is the CI platform? Yeah. We try to keep it simple. There's a bunch of good ways to do it. You know, there's a lot of commercial products that do kind of similar things also. We kind of have specific ways that we think about that type of thing. But again, we try to build the platform for the public in a way where all those things are possible, and not just possible, but readily
That's
feasible.
kind of where I was going. I was just wondering if you were using like something like Travis or Circle CI that's
Yeah.
already integrated with the platform.
Yeah, a lot of people do.
Yeah.
Yeah. You had a question, sir?
Yeah, for this like kind of chat interface right here, does it just pass along your credentials to make sure you have rights to do whatever you're trying to do?
That's a really good question. I guess so.
I was just curious. 'cause
I was told that it
seems-
worked, and it was in our documentation for my team, and so I do it, and then it does something, and I mean, that's
Fair
a really
enough.
good question. I'm sure it does. I don't know. Yes, sir, again.
When you do your commits prior to doing the pull request, if you're adding a new button, for example,
Yeah.
are you writing a new set of test scripts at that point, how are you integrating the test scripts into your CI?
Yeah.
Because you said that there's some test scripts run from the pull request
Mhm.
at some point. Where in the process are they getting in there?
Yeah. So, are we okay on time for a minute for some more questions? Okay. Yeah, thank you. If anybody does have to leave, I'm not offended. People gotta go to work, right? So, pull requests and commits and testing and CI. Yeah. The way I try to do things more is I'm trying to get more toward a TDD process. The more uncertain for me that I am about what I'm trying to do, the more I want to do it in a test-driven development manner. And there's some specific ways to do that by the book or whatever. I try to take it more at sort of a figurative level. So ideally, to embrace that, on my branch, one of my early commits would be in addition to our set of test scripts. For my team, it's Bash, honestly. So people are like, oh, Bash, this should be a real language. This should be other thing X. Works for us, and especially at a systems level, right? The kind of testing that I'm involved in doing for my components is about system level integration, right? Is the daemon running? Does the file exist? This kind of stuff that Bash was built to do. And so that works for our team. And for the main Rails app, it'd be Rails test with, I forget if they use RSpec or Cucumber or whatever, but they have that Ruby Rails type testing for that team, right? So I would try to write those tests first. If I'm doing it in a disciplined way, I would then push those changes, and then I try to open my pull request early, right? And I mark it work in progress. It's kind of one little trick we use. So then CI would run because there was a new push, and then it would go red because the test failed, right? So it's this pattern red-green refactor. So the test went red, then I'm going to fulfill that test with actual application code if it's a Ruby component, a Bash component, JavaScript, whatever. And then ideally the test goes green. And kind of you embrace, if you look up, test-driven development, red-green refactor, these are normal things. It's not specific to GitHub. We don't really get very dogmatic about methodology in that way. We kind of, GitHub is kind of focused on, I'm going to back off that. GitHub really embraces engineers on a team using methodologies that work well for them, right? And also at a team level. So some people, especially on something simpler, might just say, look, it's an HTML change, I'm just going to push it. You're not really going to do like a test suite to make sure the HTML element exists, probably, mostly. So it kind of varies in that way. Does that answer your question? Okay.
You're actually doing that first.
I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, I don't do it every time, right?
Yeah, well, I'm sure.
But that's the.
Yeah.
If I'm going to be very disciplined, then that's sort of the objective. Yeah.
We're trying to implement testing into our software. We've never tested before. We just, I'm kidding.
Okay. Well, I mean, I've seen places where that happens, and by you telling the story, I wouldn't pin it on you that was happening necessarily, if that's fair. Yeah. Other questions? Anybody over here? Let's see. Who was first? Okay. Yes, sir.
So back to your interaction with your team, do you find that the distributed nature of your team allows your team to be more or less productive? Because you've got the concept, you mentioned not using Scrum. Of course, Scrum is difficult to use when we've got people spread throughout the United States or the world. But I understand why you said that. But do you find it more or less difficult, and do you find your team more or less productive?
Right. There's about 120 variables involved, so I couldn't really tell you in an isolated, controlled way a specific answer. But taking your question more figuratively, I mean, it's a very productive team. I mean, all these people on my team are great across the company. They're great. More specifically, you know, we hire very productive engineers who, maybe with some. I think we hire some newer people as well, newer to the industry. But most people we hire are pretty seasoned and kind of have figured some of these things out. As far as it's honestly very difficult. You know, I work from home as a remote employee. I really try to use the word distributed instead of remote because, especially on my team, you know, 1 or 2 people work at the office, but just because they live in San Francisco, it's not intentional. So it's really a distributed effort. You know, the word remote implies there's a company and this person's over here, and it's an exception, right?
Or maybe framed a different way.
Yeah.
If you had your way, would you move them all to Charleston and squish them in a room, and you would that be better or worse?
I do have a secret mission where I would love for there to be more GitHub employees in Charleston. That's a different question. I don't know. I mean, I think I've read a lot of things about working remotely, and if it's really working well, it is an advantage, not a disadvantage. It's not a handicap for the team's overall momentum, right? By enabling people to work remotely, they have control over their environment, their space, their, aromatherapy diffuser, their weird, I like this like magenta light sometimes from a certain mood, right? That, I can't really do that so good in some cubicle form office, right? I've worked in all different types of environments where, at Spark, in the early days especially, we're all kind of sitting around one table. It's like a team. And that was one way of working, and it's very conversational driven in that way. And this is sort of the opposite, actually. So if it's working well, people feel supported to leverage being a remote employee to be more focused, and maybe not every second of the day, but maybe their day shifts and mingles. But the overall outcome is often a higher level of output and quality output, not just lines of code, but really impact on the product and the company by being remote, because they can have the level of focus and self-motivation and drive and still feel connected, right? It has to be very intentional to maintain connections with your team on a social and collaborative level. And you have to find ways to do that. And I think of the way that I operate as if I was a freelancer or an entrepreneur from a daily workflow standpoint. Except I don't have to do like accounting and like bill collection or whatever, right? Just do code. It's cool. It has to be very intentional to be remote, right? And it's not for everybody. I will never say that every single employee in America ought to work remotely. It has to be a specific orientation of a person to mental orientation to work effectively in that way. Because you have to be self-driven, right? Yes, ma'am.
Do you think, though, that it's the fact that you're all distributed versus the outlier, right? If you're going to do Scrum and work in a team and there's one person that's on their own, that's far more difficult than if everyone's distributed, because then you have tools that everyone consistently uses, right?
You 100% made the point for me.
Yeah.
I have no answer.
Sorry.
Yep.
So,
No, I love it. Yeah, that was great. Yeah. I mean, just to underscore kind of what you said, I just read this the other day that by having people on the team that work remotely, let's say there was a different scenario where some people are in the office, right? Everybody has to use the same process patterns, tools, communication styles, or it's just not fair both ways. So, we talked about this process, right? This process for our company, we would use if people were distributed or not. Because even if people are in the office, there's somebody 100 yards on the other side of the building, they may as well be remote from a communication standpoint, unless we go to the water cooler, right? So it has to be that equality of process between remote and whatever the opposite is, in office, I guess commuters, right? Yeah. Did that kind of
Yeah.
speak to what you're saying? Yeah, you made a great point.
I
somebody
I was
else.
just gonna
Yeah.
add to that. I'm a total outsider, but I'm mostly self-taught, and I actually learned by contributing to open source software. So you have these methodologies for management, like Scrum and Agile, and those are wonderful, but GitHub actually invented their own, the GitHub Flow. That is a management methodology, and you see it all over the place with open source software. So to me, actually coming into like an Agile environment is totally foreign. Having somebody dictate, hey, this week you're going to work on this, this, and this. I don't like that. I very much enjoy going on GitHub and looking at the open issues and saying, okay, I'm going to look for issues tagged with bug and that are tagged for the next release. And I'm going to work on this one because this one's interesting to me. So to me, GitHub invented its own software engineering management methodology.
Yeah, I think it's a great point too. And kind of the reason that we have adopted the types of processes that we have at this company is it's really centered around the principle that engineers on the team are expected to be largely self-driven. The more senior you get, the more that's true. But even at, I've not really worked with any junior people at this company. I assume that we have some somewhere. I don't mean that to be rude, or anything, but I just don't know them. I mean, people I tend to interact with are, mid to senior and up. So that kind of goes with that type of engineer. And for somebody to succeed at this company, you really kind of have to be kind of that way about being, thanks for coming. About being like self-driven, self-motivated. Maybe you do this little side thing for a day. It's kind of your own thing. You didn't really talk to anybody about, but then you like kind of surface it. It's like, hey, I did this, and then you talked about it, right? And maybe bring it in. So, it's probably a challenge for somebody who, in order to succeed, kind of relies on that scaffolding, which is also a great way. I worked in that environment too, and it's also a great way to have especially a large number of developers kind of working together, but where everybody has like a specific focus on like, cool, here's my ticket from the Scrum tracker or whatever. I'm going to focus on this, and we're all going to come together next Monday and then talk about what we did and what we're doing on our next tickets or stuff like that. Right? That's also a way people build software, and I got nothing bad to say about any of those processes. This is the one that we do. Yeah, that kind of address your question.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, sir.
There are quite a few third-party, what do you call them, add-ons or plugins, but do you use any of them, or have any favorites your team using for your work?
Yeah. We can chat later. I'm trying to focus this on overall sort of principles in process. There are specific vendors we use for stuff, but you could do this type of process with a lot of different options. If you think of video conferencing, there's probably 5 top-tier video conferencing products that all work pretty well, right? There's a bunch of different chat tools, and most of them have like API hooks where you can, the reason Hubot can do this is that this chat tool, which is one you may have used, has APIs where a script run from Hubot can then make an HTTP API call to the chat system. It says, hi, I'm responding to this message from T-Bailing with the following text, right? And that's like 4 lines in any language mostly. So if you have a chat tool that has an API hooks like that, you can do this same principle, right, the same process. If you don't, then you should probably use a different chat tool, honestly. You can do this with IRC, actually, because define an API, right? Is an IRC client implementing an API? Probably. I digress.
No,
Other questions? I'm happy to stick around. I understand that some people have to go to work or whatever. It's totally fine. Yeah.
Ted, one more on how in this distributed team that you're involved in, how big is the team? How many people?
My team has grown. I think we're around 15 right now.
Okay.
And we're trying to add a few more. But then we've also sort of reformulated a little bit with like a functional
Subgroup.
Yeah, kind of subgroup is a good word. But
And they're working on generally one project at a time or multiple projects at
So
That adds a,
on my team, everybody kind of has their main focus project at one time. Like right now, well, let me put it the other way. The last big thing I did that actually shipped in the last major release of 2.12, which was my onboarding project, was adding support for Let's Encrypt to GitHub Enterprise. And so I sent the release notes to my mom, and she was like, "Oh, proud, right?" That's cool. She's like, "Wow, you've only been there like 4 months, and like here you're shipping like this bullet point item. It's like in the top of the not at the top, but within the top of the release notes. Like that's pretty awesome." It's more a testament to how well our process works than anything else, honestly. But so I've got another thing that's of that nature that'll be in the next major release, hopefully. That type of system level feature, right? And so that's the way I try to work. I think most people on my team work in a similar way, where we have like kind of a major focus that's kind of complicated, and may require some collaboration a little bit, and then maybe some side things, right? Where it's like code reviews. I'm going to fix this script for 5 lines. It's something else, Support person escalated some bug from a customer where we need to like make a little config change and do that. Man, we didn't talk about backports at all. Probably shouldn't add that at this point. Essentially, we use automation and the same kind of scripting that we talked about with Hubot in order to open new pull requests and actually make new branches in support of our prod development. It's the short thing that we do. I tell you that to express the principle more than to tell you the nitty-gritty of our teams at work. Yeah.
Let's do this then. So, what I would offer up basically is if we have this distribution list, so what we'll do is just send specifically this group. And if there's a need to do a deeper dive on some stuff, we'll bring them back in for an hour, maybe a lunch and learn.
I love it.
Okay, that's one thing. So we can because I think I mentioned to you basically the introduction, then getting deep into it. So there's a lot of developers here and that kind of thing. So I'll put that out. Basically, we can offer it up into folks who don't want a deeper dive. Let's take, I guess, a last question. Basically, if there's one, and and Ted will be here for a couple of minutes, so you can ask him if you got some specific questions. But if there is an interest in learning more, then it's easy enough to do a lunch and learn kind of session.
Did anybody not learn? I want to say learn, but did anybody not think more about something from our talk today? Cool, success. I love it.
Any last questions? Okay. If there is anything, I guess, from you guys in the audience, basically, obviously this is not a crowd where you're trying to sell an insurance policy, but if there's anything of relevance to this community that you guys want to mention, this is a chance that's coming up, basically, that's kind of relevant to the technical and our digital court audience. Feel free to kind of mention here. I'll leave by just saying that we've got our annual I-5K race, which is once again in North Charleston Riverfront Park. It's a month earlier on March 22nd. So if you guys want to register, go to the I-5K site, register your team or individual and that kind of thing. But is anything else that's
In March, we'll be hosting the Fridays EV Bell with the South Carolina Sea Grant, and I will be here talking about STEM education in South Carolina. So it'll be a hands-on science course if you want to join us.
You sure have a voice for radio.
Thank you.
All right, with that, certainly appreciate you coming out today, and just as I tell people, I said, if you guys have some topics that are very relevant that you guys would like to know more about, just send it to It's Fridays at charlestondigitalcourt.com, and we're happy to kind of incorporate it in. It's just like Taylor, he just said, I'd love to bring this forward. STEM's critically important. I'm having a lot of conversations about this, so. We don't basically set up and cook this stuff up. It's really just kind of for the conduit for what you guys want to hear about. So just remember that. And then, as I mentioned, I think I did mention earlier, Ted Tanner is going to present. They probably are, the most advanced blockchain deployment, basically in Charleston at Pocket Dogs. So basically, he's going to present on blockchain technology either in February if he's not traveling, which he travels a lot, or March at the very latest. So we'll figure we might actually move if tailor forward, you know, if we have to, that kind of thing, but that's coming up basically in Q1. So again, thanks for coming out, and
Carl's here. Do you want me to talk about SyntaxCon, or do you want to talk about it?
Oh, sure. Sure,
Carl is one of the most amazing people, is again running SyntaxCon, which is awesome. And so it's a conference, and keep me honest, but it's a conference here in Charleston, regionally focused as well as with international appeal and you know, global speakers about all kinds of development topics, systems engineering. I've spoken on it before, I've attended it. Is this your third time doing it?
So
Fourth?
this year will be the third year, and it covers 3 tracks: front end, back end, and what we call platforms, to be more of a catch-all for DevOps, mobile, and a lot of other things. The goal is to build this into a larger event. When I look at what Raleigh has been able to do with All Things Open, it's amazing. But I think they're in it to their 11th year. It takes a while to build up a conference. But if we're in a state where there's a great shortage of developers, a shortage of talent, and if we can attract more people here and provide more educational or ongoing professional development right here, so you don't have to travel out of the state, that is something that we really need to build. And this year's the 3rd year, so if you haven't heard about it, if you haven't seen anything, take a look at syntaxconference.com or syntaxcon.com. We're just about to start announcing most of the speakers. So that's in June 6th, 7th, and 8th. 6th, 2 workshops, and 7th and 8th at the conferences. So feel free to check it out.
And you can also find it, we'll put it on our calendar, CDC calendar of events. And I think Carl's been good enough to basically offer CDC members a discount to the conference anyway. So there'll be a discount code as well. So, but I do agree on that, in that regard, basically, for those of you, and I'm looking at Jen, who have HR shops within your respective companies, we're going to have a private sort of event, you know, with HR folks. So basically, I think for those guys who know me, basically, I'm not much of a conversation guy. Basically, it's like, what do we need to be doing, then go do it. So I think, you know, Carl says, you know, the issue is blending, you know, basically folks that we're growing here and folks that we're attracting from outside of town. And so I'm going to be sending a note to our members, basically. You know, it's like I said, it's going to be a private event. It probably won't be advertised, just to kind of, you know, do a deep dive on where we need to be and what we need to be doing to kind of address this. And I think it's, you know, SyntaxCon does just that. It brings more interest in the community from developers, you know, who are out in the community, who are looking at what are my opportunities in Charleston, that kind of thing. So they appreciate Carl doing. He also relieved me of doing something that I did it for 2 years, and I was like, this is tough. I'm not into conferences. So basically, probably this year, step up our support for, you know, SyntaxCon as we move forward. So thanks again for coming up. I'll let you guys get back to work.